We're going to listen to Coca-Cola from Greg Pharo, who's also with the ANA Analytics Group, whatever.
Data and Analytics.
I made that up. Johnson & Johnson, Igor, and Bill Cramblit from MillerCoors. And so obviously this is a little more packaged goods oriented than the last one. I know Greg had experience having come from AT&T, so he is a little more like our previous panel with a lot of experience in the first-party data and one-to-one marketing than I think some of the other marketers are. Although you guys can check me on that. I mean, if that's not true, then be sure to tell me. So why don't we just talk again very briefly. How long have you been doing this, and how's it going?
Sure. So once again, I'm Greg Pharo with Coca-Cola, and I've been working broadly in the attribution space for, golly, about 20 years now. Starting off, in the area of mix modeling. As we talk about specifically what we think about as attribution nowadays, I've been working in that space for about 7 years, 5 of those with AT&T and then 2 of them at Coca-Cola. At Coca-Cola, we've done a fair amount of work focused in the United States with a little bit of work outside of the United States in attribution, most of that taking place over the course of about the last 2.5 years.
Great. Bill?
Yeah, so can you hear me? Yeah. I joined MillerCoors in 2016, and at the time, we were doing this experimental process that was really focused on shifting our TV dollars around, kind of within our portfolio. And I was on the mix modeling team at the time. Spent the next year in advanced analytics, and that process for TV kind of shifted to something that was TV and digital and holistic, a little bit more interesting, a little bit more detailed. In 2018, I took over the process. And we rebranded it internally as MTA, but it was MTA the whole time, right? So we've been doing it since 2016, shifting dollars around based on the most granular data we can get our hands on.
Right, so my experience is similar to Greg's, a little bit more than 20 years of mix, brand lifts, sales lifts, A/B testing, but the more heavy-duty multi-touch attribution, multivariate attribution passed since 2017.
Wow, did you ever think that this whole field would be like the coolest thing going on in the industry? Really? Cooler than TV? I know. You know what? I'd like to turn that slide off because you say MillerCoors right across your face and you say Johnson right across your face. Right across your face. And I also want to point out that Bill has MillerCoors shoes. Shoes! He's got MillerCoors shoes.
Coors Light Vans. Sorry, you can't get them.
Okay. Are you going to do that?
I'm trying.
Okay. Is there any definitional issue you want to talk about with MTA or cross-platform? What language should the industry adopt so we all know what we're talking about? Thank you.
Well, it's a good question. I think, like many things, initially there was a lot of struggle to figure out what exactly to call it. Was marketed by a lot of different names. I'd say that there's a lot of people who are kind of settling on MTA, multi-touch attribution. One of the things that still makes me very sad sometimes is that attribution, the term attribution, can mean many different things to many different people. In some cases, it can refer to last touch attribution. In other cases, people automatically think that it's algorithmically driven, scientifically endorsed fractional attribution. But very broadly speaking, nowadays, when we talk about attribution, we are really thinking about in terms of multi-touch attribution. I think importantly is what exactly goes into that witch's brew of attribution. What particular media or what particular consumer touch points are in and what's out, and what particular outcome or outcomes are you trying to measure through by it, and what are you not? And is it something which is more unified, holistic of an approach, or is it something which is more tactical, only designed to answer questions from one particular type of media?
I think, personally, we focus more on the outcome of the process than the name, right? I mean, you can call it whatever. I don't really care, right? We're trying to make the best use of our media dollars and make every dollar work harder to drive growth for our business and our brands, right? And so whether that's NTA or through mix or through some other methodology, I do think that it does get really confusing, as Greg was saying, when it comes to all the different pieces. Fundamentally, NTA has to be done at the most granular level possible, so household or consumer data, right? And done, I would say, in a fractional or algorithmic way. Otherwise, it's not really multi-touch.
Right. So we internally there is not a lot of confusion because we use a certain approach to multi-touch attribution. We use marketing mix for more strategic resource allocation and planning, and we use multi-touch attribution, which is people-based closed-loop measurement for different purposes. And as long as our brand teams are not confused, and currently they're not, we're okay with the terminology.
Yeah, let's talk about that for a second. What role does attribution have, and are you still using market mix modeling? Do you still use any, test and control? Do you do brand trackers? Has it supplanted any of these other tools, or do they all have a specific role?
Great question. I can tell you that mixed modeling has not gone away for us, okay? And I don't foresee it going away anytime in the near future in the particular category that we play in. In many ways, attribution has been a way of being able to better answer some questions faster and with greater granularity, greater precision than what we had possible just with mixed modeling alone. And it is very, very useful as one of the tools that we have in our ROI and insights toolkit. But certainly, I would not say that it's displacing anything right now. The truth is that there are always going to be other tools there which can better answer some longer-term questions about the efficacy of our marketing spend, which we like to have in the mix, things which might include consumer tracking data, and mixed modeling, like I said, continues to play a very central role to what we have.
Bill, is that true at MillerCoors? Is that true with you, that you have mix and attribution? And
Yeah, and a few other things. Whoa.
it's
You can hear me
working.
now? Okay. Yeah, so we have a handful of core tools and processes. Mix is a very major one. Mix is very backward looking for us, right? So I'm kind of looking at our historical campaigns, sometimes with a pretty significant lag, and trying to determine what we can learn, really kind of boiling a spreadsheet of results into 3 bullet points and going forward and saying, okay, here are the 3 major things we're going to do, which is really, Mix is bread and butter. MTA is a little different, right? So we're using MTA to kind of do forward-looking optimization. So we're generating specific instructions that then go into market that are really granular and really based on the faster-moving signals. So they kind of have their own swim lanes. Then we have all these other, because we're a consumer brand company fundamentally, so we have a bunch of ad measurement and creative measurement methodologies as well. And I do see a future where all these come together into kind of a single source, and not maybe a single analysis or methodology, but a single way of looking at it.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Right. So I think it did push out a lot of brand lift and sales lift work. That's gone to a large extent from the brands that use a multi-touch attribution. What it did currently, I think it elevated the profile of the marketing mix work. We've seen synergistic effect. We've seen stronger momentum from the mix. It got reinvigorated through MTA. I think it's temporary. I do think that MTA will start pushing it away in the longer term, as we would be able to incorporate television, which I really hope will happen soon. In multi-touch attribution, I think that the brands that employ mostly addressable tactics are going to need mix less and less, and it will become less important for those brands. I don't think it is going to happen tomorrow, so I think Greg is right about near term, but over time I do think that the shift will happen.
How do you feel about the move to integrate both of them, unified measurement, market level and individual level, in one model?
We want to do it. I don't know how real it is, right? I think the jury's still out on how that's done and how it's done properly.
We were just having the conversation, okay? unified modeling, unified analysis like this is something that we all are hoping for, okay? But we also want to be very realistic about the journey from here to there. And for right now, we're still looking and examining at what tools are out there for unified modeling, but I would say that there's still a way to go before we're comfortable.
Some marketers have talked about getting competing attribution study results. Either from, if they get a return on investment study from a media provider, or even in-house, they can get different answers and everything. How do you reconcile a vast number of attribution solutions? Anybody?
I don't know that we see a lot of different attribution results. We get the ones like directly from third parties, like we'll run a study through Facebook or YouTube or something like that. It just so turns out that those third parties who provide those studies tend to not be accessible in our MTA models, right? So there really isn't a lot of inconsistency there. We do see inconsistency between our internal measurement tools, kind of the legacy tools, right? And making those work together is really, really difficult, and at the end of the day, we've had to dedicate swim lanes and make sure that they're being used in the way that they were intended and not stepping on each other's toes for now.
Right, so very similar to what Bill is describing. So it is a little bit about triangulation with other research or other insights when we have it, and it's also figuring out and agreeing on what is the best methodology for any given question, and then agreeing that that's what we're going to use as a team.
So I think some people think that attribution is very new. And how did it gain credibility in your company? What did you have to do, and who did you have to do it with in order to say this is a great tool and we're going to allocate all of our media or some of our media with this?
Well, it's interesting. I think attribution was one of those things that I observed several years ago. We'd given some thinking to it at a company I had previously worked with, and then it seemed like attribution caught fire. There was a lot of selling into C-suite. So if anything, it reached a point where, I had C-suite people asking a company I used to work with, hey, this is going to replace everything. Attribution is going to rule the world, won't it? Okay, so it makes it a lot easier to sell it in when someone has already sold it in for you. I would say that, one of the things that I see is that if you are with a company that is very comfortable with a certain analytical rigor and a process, for instance, a good mix modeling process in place, then it becomes much simpler to bring attribution into the mix. There's not a lot of big, nasty arguments which need to take place. People understand, they sort of get, the swim lane, if you will, that attribution can play in providing better insights to the organization. So for us, I think, the sell-in process has not necessarily been nearly as difficult as it has been with certain other types of analytical tools.
I think it was a little bit more complicated for us. People didn't really know what MTA was or what to expect from it at MillerCoors, to be honest with you. We had to do a road show, right? We tried first just giving people a taste and kind of showing them what it looks like, but they didn't understand what was behind it or why it mattered. So we had to go to the executive level and explain, hey, we're going to grow these brands. We're going to do it in this way. We're going to drive more value out of our dollars, right? And cascading down from there into each of the individual brands, we've been able to get a lot of traction in that way.
So it was a two-step process. First, it was very clear to us that as the marketplace is evolving very rapidly, and more media is shifting to digital. And what was happening is our measurement and optimization toolset was becoming irrelevant. This is you're getting a lot more digital spend, and J&J spent substantial amount of money on media. The lag on the mix and the level of detail that you get from the mix does not provide good enough input into decision-making process for optimizing digital media. And then what we're also seeing is that there is a strong shift to personalized marketing and to using data to become a lot more relevant with consumers. So at this day and age, we have hundreds of targeted media audiences across the brands that we market, and you can't get any results. You can't understand how things are working for you from the traditional marketing measurement toolset that we had. So there was a massive gap in our capabilities. So we looked at the market, and the multi-touch attribution was the solution that we felt was really critical for us in order for us to be relevant in the future. So we essentially sold one brand on a pilot, and we ran a pilot as a very big brand. And we ran the pilot and we showed success after almost a year and a pretty massive effort that required a lot of changes in the way. I think that previous speakers spoke a lot about the effort and the amount of change that it requires. It's not a research project. It's not like you pay the money to run the mix and there you have a mix. It requires tagging all of the consumer touch points. It requires rethinking how you flow your media costs. There is a ton of things, and the way you plan the media, you truly need to rethink the flexibility in that in order to be able to benefit from the results. So we tried to do as much as we could with one brand, and then we showed the results. And in J&J, you have to show the results to sell anything to anyone, and that's just the way it works. And then we went on the roadshow, brand by brand, to show the results that we were able to achieve and to get the buy-in from other business leaders. And it took a little time, and then we were able to scale the solution.
Igor, do you now do it on every brand?
We now do it on every brand that spends sufficient amount of money on digital media to justify the investment and the effort.
And then, I think when we were all really familiar with market mix modeling, it was kind of an annual event. You'd go to the big meeting and you figure out what you wanted to look at, and then you'd come back about 6 months later and you get the big answer. Does MTA sort of force a different cadence within the company, and how do you manage that from an organizational standpoint?
Well, absolutely. I think that one of the big advantages of MTA is precisely because of the cadence, okay? When we think about it, I always like to think about the process as having 4 distinct phases to it. We can talk about that at a future point. But one of the nice things about MTA is that it does allow you to have at least the possibility of in-flight optimization. That's something which is very, very tricky with mixed modeling, okay? Yeah. So that's a huge differentiator right there. And a huge advantage to MTA is not just the cadence, but the absolute speed which it delivers, which it's able to deliver, as opposed to mixed modeling. Obviously, there's also the added benefit of greater granularity, which is something that you're not going to be able to get out of most cases of mixed modeling. So it's able to inform different types of decisions, far more tactical decisions than you're ever going to get out of a mixed model approach.
Bill, this one's coming to you. Tell me how it works. Like with market mix modeling, the CFO would say, okay, I'm going to give television $10 million, but now I have an attribution tool that's a dashboard in every junior analyst's desk. Who gets to pull the trigger and say, I'm going to put $10 million into programmatic, and how does that work?
I do, just kidding. Actually, I mean, for us, our budgets are between high-level tactics, so TV, digital, our budgets are held kind of whole, and the money shifts from within those. So for TV, for example, you'd be moving money between creatives rather than from TV to online video. I think that's a wall we want to break down, but right now, organizationally, it's just pretty complicated.
How does that decision structure go?
The same as with mixed modeling until you get to the monthly optimizations that we run, and then those decisions are basically the process is we'll bring the optimization output to the brand organization that manages the budget. And they'll essentially say, okay, good to go. That's really it.
Because that's going to be an interesting little question when we get to sort of real-time optimization. Who's pulling the trigger? Who's deciding it, and who gets to actually do that? And what does that organizational approval system look like?
Yeah, it's consensus right now, I would say. Right, it's bringing the information to as many people as possible that hold dollars and making sure that they're comfortable with it. It's a lot of work.
Yeah, I can imagine. You know, there is no industry-wide public validation of attribution work anywhere. How do you feel about that? And in terms of sort of the credibility of the techniques you were talking about, you know, last touch and, you know, fractional attribution and all that, do we know enough about the analytic techniques behind attribution right now to be confident in it?
Well, I think that we're certainly getting there, and certainly that lack of having industry standards has, in the past, caused me a lot of consternation and a lot of heartburn. There are important questions, you know, which attribution raises. For example, how do you account for cross-media synergies for those media which are not included in an attribution model? Frankly, that is a big, hairy issue which can tremendously distort the way that you interpret results coming out of an attribution model if most of your media inputs are focused on digital, for example, and if you don't have TV incorporated in some way. That's where having, you know, a industry accepted best practices set of guidelines can really help make things better.
Yeah, I think what happens is that this is going to be for a while a place that is going to be moving fast because the data sources available change almost I'd say weekly, monthly for sure, and there is a lot of innovation that happens in the space of data sources, the tagging, as well as the analytics, and I think that. Even though it would have been great for us if there were standards, I think that if you want to be looking forward, you need to feel comfortable with that uncertainty and ambiguity. And if you cannot expect the perfection if you want to be in that space that is a little bit at the forefront, right? And I think that you need to understand that not all of the data is going to be perfect. Some of the things like the cost, like we report ROIs before we know the actual costs because that's how fast it works, right? I say we have to be comfortable with using estimated cost. There's some things that you have to leave on assumptions. And I have a running list of issues with the methodology that I wish I had a lot more confidence about. And we have a project updates on how we're trying to address those issues. And they evolve over time. Some things we figure out, and then there are new things we come up with new ideas on how to make things better. And I don't think it's going to change. It's like marketing mix has been around since the mid-50s, right? Mm-hmm. So, and quite frankly, there is still quite a bit of innovation even with that. Yeah. Yeah. So I think that there are a lot of smart people are working on it, and it will keep evolving. At least I hope that it will.
Do you think we have a good sense of sort of what the unmeasured media, the bias that introduces into attribution, multi-touch attribution systems? Do we know enough about what we're leaving on the table? That was not on the list of questions, just so you know. I'm improvising. And you don't have to answer it if you don't want.
I mean, I think it's really important that we build a complete model, right? That's that's difficult. There's not good data out there at the right level in order to do that today, and what is out there is confusing. So, I mean, it's an unknown, if you ask me, but it's definitely an area for development.
You know, I have seen, not Coca-Cola, but back in my days at AT&T, cases where media that's not included, not specified, not measured by an attribution model, by not including it, basically you would end up making a different decision than what the attribution model by itself would have recommended. Not saying that happens all the time, but that certainly happens enough. It depends upon a lot of different factors, the industry structure, your media buy, such like that. But it is a important concern. The good news is that there are ways of addressing that, okay, either through procedures or procedurally how you link attribution to mixed modeling. It can be addressed through experimentation. I'm a great proponent of that. When in doubt, conduct market experiments in order to validate models, and also to make naysayers or skeptics feel comfortable with attribution.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I think it's an issue. I think it's an issue among many. A conversation I had this morning in a business meeting is that how do we account for some of the biases in targeting? Like if I know someone is going on vacation and I want to sell them Neutrogena sunblock, and I target them, and they buy the sunblock. Did they buy the sunblock because they were going on vacation and it's a great target, or is it because of my media? And then unless you have a proper control in your attribution, which no one has right now, you're not really truly measuring the incrementality accurately. And they can come up with a bunch of things that are not perfect. Like we try to improve things over time. We're not there.
So in the road show, did you address any of this? Did you tell people sort of about where this is going to live, and how did you bring around other parts of the organization into the attribution fold?
Me first. I mean, so specific to the challenges, I think we address them as things that we need to build going forward, right? So this is we're pioneering this new methodology. No one else in our industry that we know of is really doing it the way that we're doing it. And we really want to push it forward. So there are going to be some gaps, but at the end of the day, it enables decision making, right? And I think that was the beginning of the roadshow. But when it comes to convincing different stakeholders in different parts of the organization, I mean, it's just like anything else. You have to tailor the information to what they care about, right? The analytics groups need to get their hands deep in the methodology and make sure they're really comfortable. The marketing team just wants to know what they need to do and what it's going to get them, right? So it's that kind of process, and it's very time consuming, but I would say worthwhile for any endeavor in this space.
Yeah, I think in the roadshow it's about showing them the money, and I think that's essentially is what you focus on quite a bit.
So is that the answer to adoption, is once you prove that it can help you, bring money to the bottom line?
It is. It's what it is that, and it's when you think about, like you asked the question in the previous panel, is how different is MT? Is it a new iteration of something that's old, or is it something that's groundbreaking? And I actually think it is groundbreaking, because what happens is that before there's an old quote that 50% of my media isn't working, you just don't know which 50%. And for the first time you see MTA, so with digital media, it is very, very fragmented, right? And there's a lot going on, especially on a large brand. Once you open it up, you open up the hood, you could see that it may not be 50% that is not working, and you don't know to what extent things are working, not working. And it may be like, so what you see is very, very revealing, and your ability to optimize is dimensionally different from what you ever had before. And with all of the shortcomings, there is still so much potential to use in that what we have now is so much better than what we had before. Then I say, how do I get more of it while I'm trying to solve all of the problems? Right? Because there are commercial benefits to it.
Does everybody use a third-party provider, or do you do your own work? We didn't talk about this, did we?
We use third party.
Third party.
Same.
And so tell me about that adoption process. Do you put out an RFP and everybody answers it and you say, I love you guys? Or do you, start small, use a whole bunch of them, and then see how it all goes? What is that process like?
Well, we've tended to use more of a trial approach, and we've done that with more than one particular agency, more than one vendor. And frankly, we're still kind of in the we still have been doing a trial approach. Okay, we have not taken the we haven't taken the full journey into attribution the same way that some other companies have.
We've had a relationship with Marketing Evolution, which has already been mentioned, for a few years now, and it's been solid. I mean, we did issue an RFI into the industry a while ago, and they won. So. We believe in regularly reviewing our partnerships, but we've had a really strong relationship with our incumbent.
was more of a trial approach on this. We did a pilot that worked, and then we scaled it.
Now, why do you think all three of you have third-party or provider relationships, and the previous group is all doing it in-house? Did you feel more confident in just sort of going with the? I don't just see if there's a difference between those two.
Well, I mean, one of the key differences there, of course, is that in the case of Coca-Cola, we rely upon third parties in order to provide us with data on sales. We also are not going to have the close to perfect information that the companies that participated in the previous panel have about who is buying their product. They have information that, frankly, we're never going to have in the CPG space. Because of that, rather than trying to go it alone, it's good for us to be able to work with different third-party providers out there that are able to help us think through some of those issues.
Data was the issue for us too. I think. I mean, we, as a beer company, it's very, very difficult to get information on the people who are consuming or purchasing your products, and so we need partners who are able to help us get transparency into that area, and so that's why we've gone to the third-party space.
So it's the same here, but I think there is more to it. There are also certain capabilities that I think would have taken a lot longer for us to develop, in all fairness. And I also think that there is another benefit. Like over time, I think we are going to unlock our challenge with the walled gardens, which is a big challenge. And I think in order to be able to unlock it, we need strong third-party independent measurement entities that are sort of swizzle neutral companies that walled gardens could trust to do work inside their walls and have access to their data. And I don't think that they would provide that access to the advertisers, and I don't think they would provide access to the data to other publishers. But I think that there is a selected group of third-party providers that already have existing relationships that have a shot at it. So I think there are multiple benefits that at play here.
I mean, we have the same issue with walled gardens, and frankly, when it comes to choosing attribution providers, that's important consideration. Who's able to work with them to help overcome those issues?
Great. Well, I have one last question, but I'd like to open it up for the floor. And if you don't have any questions, then I get to keep going. So who would like to ask a question of this panel?
Or any of the prior panelists.
No, that's messy, but go ahead.
So my ears perked up when all of you talked about swim lanes and organizational opportunities. You don't have to speak specifically about your company, but ideal state, do you think it would be better to perhaps kind of swim in your own lane and just keep proving it out there, or maybe holistically think moving forward about getting some of those walls down and rethinking what you're trying to accomplish if those swim lanes didn't exist? And how do you kind of balance those things? Because you got to keep moving, but I'm guessing there might be quite a few things that you wish were more ideal as it related to kind of organizational setup.
We need to work together within the organization, right? So we need to take the original purpose of each of the methodologies that might not be aligning perfectly, and go back to square one and try to figure out the right way, which is what we're doing right now.
Right, and the swim lanes for us is more about clarification for the marketing teams and our internal stakeholders on what methodology to use for what kind of decision making, so there is no confusion internally. Because as we introduce new tools, people try to understand, so how do I use it on top of something else? So these are not necessarily organizational swim lanes. These are the guidelines for how to use the insights for decision making.
And that's the same
For
situation with us. It's not a question of organization. It's a question of how the tools work together. For instance, attribution in its current form, at least for us, would have some issues addressing long-term impact. Okay, so if you're going to, so how might that be supplemented by also using other tools to help answer that question, and also understanding exactly what other types of questions that attribution is better able to answer than some other tools, and when different tools have to work together. For instance, to understand the synergistic impact of media, they're included outside, they're not specified within an attribution model.
Sure.
How do you guys think? I know in the last panel there was definitely some discussion about brand metrics, not just sort of true attribution. I think in CPG maybe the notion of sort of a customer lifetime value, a 12-pack sold to somebody, the first purchase they've ever made, is worth more to you than a 12-pack sold to a loyal household, an additional 12-pack. How do you guys think about metrics other than just the sort of sales metric?
That's a great question. I think that, certainly the concept, the notion of lifetime value has really been picked up and utilized more in certain types of service industries as opposed to CPG. The concept still applies, though. I think that very often the way we'll look at it is within Coca-Cola is looking at it in terms of recruitment. That is being able to bring new people into the franchise to get them to purchase a brand where they hadn't been considering purchasing it before.
So we're beginning to get into the lifetime modeling as we're trying to move to a personalized marketing space. As we do it, it comes with the territory, something that we have to do. So we're starting to work on that. That being said, in practical terms, for multi-touch attribution, it's not easy to incorporate the equity and long-term effects. So a simple way to do it, and what we're trying to do now is we look at the campaign objectives, and campaign objective could be drive awareness or drive engagement, or it could be acquisition of new customers, or it could be you drive transactions. So you could build the benchmarks. When you look at your ROI, you can build the benchmarks based on the objectives, so you don't gauge the brand equity campaign against your engagement campaign. Right, so at least you don't compare the apples and oranges, and then when you start comparing the benchmarks within the awareness, you don't penalize the media that is not meant to drive short-term sales quite as much, right? It's not a perfect solution, but it's something that we're implementing.
Sure, Rita.
From a publisher perspective, I'm just kind of wondering how much detail you go into with MTA. I mean, you're able to get much more real-time optimization type thing, but is there any value to having partnerships with publishers to kind of reinforce the value of specific campaigns down to sort of placement level or targeting or segments? How do you work with publishers in that?
So the question is, how do you work with publishers, and is there any value to working with publishers to see the impact of individual campaigns?
At a publisher level, our main model measures the majority of them. The walled gardens we have to have relationships with to measure in that way. Everything else is measured through the main output, so we don't really need the publisher relationships for that purpose.
Further down, we can look at the total publisher, but within the publisher, let's say you build custom segments and you want to get into understanding which segment works better, down to that kind of granular.
So you get down to
Yeah,
that
those
level.
are surfaced.
So that's
Yeah.
the level we read now,
Yeah.
down to the targets within the publisher.
So there's no value to doing specific publisher evaluations because you have it all in there.
No, wouldn't say that. There may be value, but they need to bring additional value, and there are different ways to do it. And that, so things like that do happen, but it's not within the targeted segments. But there is an additional data discussions. There are other things. There could be insights that could be discussed as a part of the relationship with the publisher. So publishers have a lot of value in this space that could be unlocked within
Yeah, I mean, and to be fair, there are tactics we do that can't be measured in the attribution model as it stands today. Content integration is a really good example of that, right? If it can't be tagged, it can't be measured. So we have to work with our publisher partners in order to measure those. So there are a bunch of those tactics going on all the time where those relationships are important. So.
Do we have another question?
From one of the live streamers, I'm going to read it because it's too long to remember. Alice mentioned programmatic before. How well do you think your current methods separate out the cost to acquire that spotter impression versus the actual impact of that impression in driving sales?
You want me to repeat that?
Uh,
Okay, so the topic is programmatic.
yes. How well do you think your current methods
How well do you think your current methods
separate out the cost to acquire that spot?
separate out the cost to acquire that
Spotter impression
spotter impression?
versus the actual impact of that impression
So the cost versus the impact
in driving sales?
in driving sales. It's interesting.
As good as with anything else. I think that the data from programmatic that flows into our model is the same data from our other digital sources, so there shouldn't be any distinction.
Yeah, actually, I think it may be better than a lot of some other data.
Yeah, same here. I think the question comes down to how do you measure the cost versus the benefit, and in the case of programmatic, that's something which MTA is designed to be able to address.
You know what all the costs are? Yeah.
Programmatic is easy to get.
Yeah? Okay. Yes?
More of a question to Greg, but for everyone really. In your bio, it says you've developed some techniques around AI. So when we talked about attribution, is one of those things that you banded around a lot. AI is obviously banded around a lot. Can you go into a bit more detail of how you're using AI to pre-flight test the effectiveness or the performance? And if you guys are doing anything else, maybe not AI, but what are you doing pre-flighting testing?
Can you summarize the question?
Yeah, I'll summarize the question, and that is, how are we using AI for pre-flight, as well as for other ways of being able to gain insight and better precision target. And I would say that a lot of the work that I've been doing recently with AI has been on the other half of the job, which I do, which is really around creative development, message development, and such. And that's really where my AI efforts have been focused on, and that is being able to understand things such as how does an ad developed in one part of the world, how could that be transferred successfully to other parts of the world, okay? Or even taking it a step further, how can you basically take an ad and be able to get and use AI to get a good, accurate prediction of how well it will perform in market. But that'll have to be a topic for a future conversation.
Are you talking dynamic creative optimization?
This is something a little bit different from dynamic creative optimization, although it can be used for dynamic creative optimization. But once again, it'll be a separate conversation we'll have to have. It's a little bit different than attribution.
Okay. Another question?
Can you talk a little bit about the cadence and frequency of the attribution reporting, as well as additional KPIs you integrate with attribution to drive your optimizations?
This is a question about the cadence of attribution results relative to other things you use.
Well, for us, I would say that the cadence has been monthly.
Yep, monthly.
So I'm going to give a little bit more of a vague answer to that. I actually think it is still evolving. I think it is tied to the brand media planning cycle. It started out as monthly. We've been cutting the frequency, and what we're finding is that there is a balance and there is an opportunity cost in terms of the time that marketers have to invest and the planning teams have to invest in changing the plans and the opportunity to optimize. And we're still trying to find that balance. It's still changing some, but it's started out as monthly, and right now it's less frequently than monthly. It depends a little bit brand by brand. Like we have seasonal brands like Allergy or Sun Care is very different from your cleansing, so it's a little different. But
Yeah, how do you guys feel about his answer? Would you provide a little more color to, or is it just straight up monthly on every single brand? And
It is straight up monthly on every single brand. We actually focused a significant amount of effort on increasing our speed. So we basically look at last month during the current month in order to impact the next month. And we worked really closely with our agency in order to be able to implement those optimizations as quickly as possible. But it is interesting what you say, because I wonder if we were to do it every 2 months, if we would have bigger chunks we could take out and kind of save some time and energy and get the same amount of impact.
so what we found is that the recommendations are not that drastically different if you do it every month or every other month. And there was quite a bit of a pushback from the agency in terms of the scope of work and also the brand teams in terms of how much engagement is required from them when you keep on streaming them with the insights monthly. So I think it's a balance, and I don't think we totally figured it out. It's pretty frequent, but I don't know exactly how frequent it needs to be. And I think it depends on the business.
great. Questions? Oh, good, it's my turn. So what's the biggest unanswered question about multi-touch attribution do you have, or does your company seem to be experiencing? Unanswered questions.
I was afraid you were going to ask this one, just for the record. Probably, I think it's what more could we do with this? So there's an incredible data asset being built behind the scenes. There's an incredible process that we've been able to scale out. There's a lot of trust in that process, for better or for worse. But now I think what people see is opportunity, right? Like, so there are probably more dollars out there that we can gain through these processes. How do we go about getting this?
I'm going to give a slightly different answer because just because of the job I have at Coca-Cola. That is, our biggest unanswered question is what other markets outside of the 2 or 3 that have experimented with attribution right now, such as the United States, are going to be able to use as we move forward. What will that adoption look like? When is it going to happen? How is it going to happen? At what point will TV be able to enter attribution models in other parts of the world? So for me, sort of the spread of it globally is a big unanswered question.
Igor?
So I actually had both of them on my list. So global is the biggest priority for me as far as the business impact, I believe. I think TV and capturing the addressable TV is going to be huge. And also leveraging our investment. It's a big organizational lift for us to do it. There are definitely things we could use it for. Like we could potentially use it to get much better insights on the path to purchase, because the data is there, the models are there. But we currently don't. What would it take to get there? We could potentially use it for much smarter programmatic bidding. But it's not a trivial thing. How do we get? So I think both of the points are exactly the right points, because the hard lift is to implement it. How do we get the most out of that investment?
Yeah, that's really cool. So it's like we want to keep going and keep reaping the benefits of it, seeing what else we can do with that. That's good. That portends a big future for attribution and attribution providers, and once we'll get all the data together.
It's about 5 o'clock now. Do we have any?
It's 5 o'clock somewhere.
It's actually here. Any last questions?
Okay, I have one last question, or are we gonna wrap up?
If you want to ask one last question.
I have one last question. Is any way that your company is thinking about advertising, just advertising differently because of MTA and MTA results? Is it dramatically changed your thinking of anything?
I think we're looking, I don't know how much to say here. We're looking into process, right? Like I guess by advertising you mean creative, more or less?
I don't know what
Whatever.
I mean.
Yeah, no, okay.
Budgets,
I mean,
targets, think of all the advertising
like
components.
along the vein of what more can we get out of this, I think there's an opportunity to kind of, for example, test creative in market in a more aggressive way than we have in the past. So I think it's more, again, of what's the future of this as pertains to advertising and less about specific insights.
For us, I'd say really 2 things. First off, I would just say that we are somewhat early on in the attribution journey, but makes us really think about how we can use it as a tool for rapid test learn, which means being far more nimble. And then with Coca-Cola, we have always been involved with personalization, interested in personalization, and attribution could potentially play a role for being able to take personalization, into a different dimension.
Yeah.
So I think it depends on who in the company you ask, but because you asked me, I think that the answer is yes. Certainly, I believe that it's different, but I don't think I could get into details on what exactly we're doing differently.
Yeah. Awesome.